When my son drove away that morning, I stood by the window, holding my coffee cup with both hands. The car disappeared around the corner, but I kept looking, as if the road might give him back. The steam from my coffee had already faded, yet I couldn't move. He didn't look back. Not once. It was a small thing, just a turn of the head, a glance in the mirror, but it felt like the world had quietly shifted. The air in the house changed that day. It was still warm from the morning sunlight, but somehow, everything felt colder. You never notice the sound of silence until it replaces laughter. And that's what it did. It replaced his voice. His footsteps, the sound of his sneakers on the kitchen tiles. For weeks after, I'd still wake up early to make breakfast for two, even though there was only me. People told me it was normal. They said boys grow up, they move away, they find their own lives. But deep inside, I knew something was different. He hadn't just moved out of the house, he'd moved away from me. And that's the part that hurt the most. My name is Margaret, but everyone just calls me Maggie. I live in a quiet suburban neighborhood with neat lawns and fences that all look the same. The kind of place where every mailbox holds more memories than letters. For 22 years, this house was our family's heartbeat. Every wall carries echoes, birthday songs, Sunday laughter, even those silly teenage arguments about curfews and laundry. My husband, Tom, used to say our house breathed. He was right. It felt alive back then. Tom passed away when our son, Daniel, was 16. A heart attack on a Thursday morning. Sudden. One moment he was reading the paper, the next, the cup slipped from his hand. I still remember the way the sunlight hit the floor that morning, like nothing had happened. Daniel was quiet at first. Too quiet. I tried to stay strong, tried to keep the rhythm of normal life. I made pancakes on Saturdays like Tom used to. I kept Daniel busy with school and sports and little projects around the house. But grief has a way of sneaking into the spaces between words. Some days, I'd find him sitting on the back steps, just staring at the sky. I'd ask, "You okay, sweetheart?" He'd nod, force a smile, and say, "Yeah, Mom, I'm fine." But mothers can tell when a fine isn't fine. We grew close in those years. Closer than I ever thought we could after losing Tom. We cooked together, we laughed at old shows, we planted a rose bush for Tom in the backyard. Daniel even promised he'd take care of me when he got older. He'd laugh and say, "You'll never be alone, Mom. You'll always have me." And I believed him. The years passed quickly. After that, he graduated, got his first job at an auto shop, and started saving for college. Every milestone felt like a small victory for both of us. I was proud. Proud of the man he was becoming. He wasn't perfect, no one is, but he was kind. He'd still call me from work just to check in. Sometimes he'd come home tired, grease on his hands, and say, "Smells like heaven in here," as he took off his boots. I lived for those moments, the sound of the door opening, the soft clatter of his keys on the table. Then one summer, he met her. Her name was Claire. She was lovely, polite, confident, a little reserved at first. I liked her, or at least, I wanted to. Because Daniel loved her. And that was enough for me. They started spending more time together, and slowly, I saw less of him. The dinners grew quieter. The weekends that were once ours filled with plans that didn't include me. At first, I told myself this was normal, that it's what happens when your children grow up. But late at night, I'd sit in the kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator keeping me company, and wonder when I'd stopped being part of his world. I'd look at Tom's photo on the shelf and whisper, "He's drifting, isn't he?" Sometimes I imagine Tom's voice answering, calm as ever, "Let him go a little, Maggie. He'll find his way back." So I tried. I really did. When Daniel told me he was moving in with Claire, I smiled and said I was happy for him. Inside, I felt something quietly breaking, but I didn't let it show. I helped him pack. I folded his shirts, tucked little notes in the pockets, small reminders that said things like "Eat properly" and "Call your mother once in a while." When the day came, the car was already packed. Claire waited by the door, polite and patient. Daniel hugged me, tight but quick. He said, "Don't worry, Mom. It's just 20 minutes away. I'll visit all the time." And I smiled. Of course, I smiled. But as I watched him drive away, I saw something I wasn't ready to see. He didn't look back. Not even once. The first few months after Daniel got married felt like walking through a house full of echoes. His laughter wasn't there anymore. The sound of his footsteps, the way he'd leave his shoes by the door, the half-drunk cups of coffee, all gone. I'd wake up every morning expecting to hear his voice, then remember he was gone. It wasn't painful at first, just strange. Like a missing sound you can't quite name. He would call sometimes. Once a week maybe. The conversations were short and polite, but not warm. "Hi, Mom. How are you?" "Oh, same old," I'd reply. "How's work? How's Emily?" "We're fine, just busy." That word, busy, became a wall between us. At first, I tried to understand. He was newly married, trying to settle down. I told myself this is what growing up means, letting go a little, giving them space. But every time I hung up, I'd stare at the phone a while longer. Part of me waited for it to ring again, maybe he'd forgotten to say "I love you," or wanted to share something funny. It never did. One afternoon, I decided to visit. It wasn't planned. I baked a loaf of banana bread, his favorite since he was little, and took the early bus to their suburb. Their house was beautiful, quiet, lined with trimmed hedges and parked cars that all looked the same. As I walked up the driveway, I saw their curtains move. When Emily opened the door, her smile was polite, but not warm. "Oh. Mrs. Thompson, we weren't expecting you." "I'm sorry, dear. I just thought I'd surprise you too," I said, holding up the banana bread like peace offering. She hesitated before letting me in. Daniel came down the stairs a minute later. His face changed when he saw me, surprised, then a flicker of guilt, then a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Mom. You should have called," he said. I tried to laugh it off. "I wanted to see my boy. Thought maybe I could have lunch with you." He looked at Emily. She looked at him. And in that silence, I realized I wasn't part of their plan anymore. Lunch was quiet. They were kind, but distant, like hosts entertaining a guest, not family welcoming a mother. I told a few stories, asked about their new furniture, but my words floated in the air unanswered. When I stood to leave, Emily said, "Next time, just let us know ahead of time, okay?" I nodded, smiling, even though something inside me was starting to crack. After that day, I stopped visiting unannounced. I waited for invitations that never came. Holidays came and went. Thanksgiving, they said they were going to Emily's parents'. Christmas, we're spending it at home this year, Mom. Maybe next time. The phrase "maybe next time" started to sound like never again. I tried to stay busy. I joined a local reading club, started volunteering at the library, even tried painting again. But every brushstroke seemed to bring his face back, the boy who used to sit on the floor drawing beside me, the young man who promised, "No matter what, Mom, I'll always come back." He didn't. Then came my birthday. I didn't expect a big celebration, just a call. Morning passed. Afternoon turned to evening. No call. No message. I sat by the window with the lights off, watching the sunset fade into darkness. At 9:12 p.m., my phone buzzed. A text, "Sorry, Mom. Been hectic. Happy birthday. Love you." That was all. I stared at those words for a long time. Then I turned off my phone and cried quietly, and not because he forgot, but because he remembered too late. The next few weeks, something changed inside me. I stopped trying so hard. I didn't want to be a burden, didn't want to sound needy. But I missed him in every corner of the house. When I passed his old room, I'd still whisper, "Good night, my boy," even though it was empty. One Sunday morning, while cleaning the attic, I found an old box labeled Daniel, College Days. Inside were letters I had written to him while he was away, photos from his graduation, a small stuffed bear I'd given him before he left for his first job. He'd kept them all. I sat there on the floor, surrounded by dust and memories, and let the tears fall freely. For a moment, I thought, maybe he still loves me, just doesn't know how to show it. That thought kept me going for a while. Months later, Daniel called unexpectedly. "Hey, Mom," he said. "Emily and I are having some people over next weekend. Want to come by?" My heart lifted. "Of course, sweetheart. I'd love to." I spent the whole week preparing, baked cookies, ironed my best dress, even practiced what I'd say so I wouldn't talk too much or embarrass him. When I arrived, the house was full of laughter. His friends were there, couples, kids running around, the smell of barbecue in the air. Daniel was busy, moving from group to group. He waved at me from across the yard but didn't come over for nearly an hour. When he finally did, he said, "Hey, Mom. Glad you made it. Everything okay?" I smiled. "Of course. You've done such a wonderful job here." Before I could say more, someone called his name, and he walked away. I found a quiet corner by the fence and sat alone. Emily passed by and said, "You can sit inside if you want, it's cooler there," but I stayed outside. Watching. Listening. The sound of Daniel laughing with his friends hurt more than silence ever could. I realized I didn't belong there anymore. That night, when I got home, the house felt colder than usual. I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat in the dark, listening to the clock tick. It's funny how time moves differently when you're alone. Some nights it runs fast, as others, it barely moves at all. I wondered when it happened, when love turned into distance, when home became a memory instead of a place we shared. Weeks passed, and our calls became even shorter. He'd say, "Hey, Mom, can't talk long, just checking in." I'd say, "It's okay, sweetheart. I'm proud of you," and I meant it even though my heart was breaking quietly behind those words. Then one morning, I got a letter, not from Daniel, but from Emily. It was polite, formal almost. She said they were moving to another city for work. No forwarding address yet. I held that letter for a long time, my hands trembling slightly. It wasn't anger I felt. It was something deeper, a hollow ache, like watching the last light fade from a window you once looked out of together. The next Sunday, I stood by the window again, just as I had years before. A car pulled out of their driveway, Daniel's old sedan. I knew that was the day they were leaving. I watched as they packed the last box, said their goodbyes to neighbors, and got in the car. Daniel started the engine. Emily waved to someone. I whispered softly, "Goodbye, my son." And as he drove away, I waited, just hoping he'd look back. He didn't. That moment, that single moment, burned itself into me. The sight of his taillights fading down the road felt like the end of something sacred. I wanted to run outside, to call out his name, to tell him there was still banana bread in the kitchen, still a mother waiting with open arms. But I didn't move. I just stood there, holding the curtain, as tears slid quietly down my cheeks. Because sometimes love isn't loud. It's the silence that stays after the door closes. The days after Daniel left felt longer than usual. I kept the curtains half open, just enough to let in the morning light. Every day looked the same, quiet, colorless, like an old photograph. I told myself he'd call once they settled in. I even kept my phone next to me, on the kitchen counter, always charged, always ready. But the calls never came. Weeks turned into months. Each morning, I'd make 2 cups of tea out of habit. Then, realizing he wasn't coming, I'd pour one down the sink. It became my little ritual of missing him, quiet, invisible, mine alone. One afternoon, while folding laundry, I found one of Daniel's old shirts tucked behind the shelf. It was faded now, but I could still smell the faint scent of his old cologne. I held it close and sat down on the edge of his bed. That's when it hit me, not as a sharp pain, but as a heavy, endless ache. He wasn't coming back. Not soon. Maybe not ever. The truth sat there quietly beside me, like an uninvited guest who had no plans of leaving. I began to notice how still the house had become. The walls seemed to listen. Every creak of the floor, every whisper of the wind against the window, it all felt louder now. Sometimes I'd talk to the walls, just to hear a voice, even if it was my own. "Good morning, Daniel," I'd say softly while making breakfast. Then I'd smile, pretending he was still there, sitting across the table with sleepy eyes, asking, "Is there any jam left, Mom?" I could almost hear it, almost. One evening, it rained. The kind of soft, steady rain that makes the world feel smaller. I sat near the window, watching droplets race down the glass. The streetlights shimmered in the puddles. That was when I saw something that made my heart stop for a moment. A young man, across the street, running through the rain, tall, dark jacket, hair sticking to his forehead. He looked so much like Daniel. I stood up, pressed my hand to the window, whispering his name, Daniel, but it wasn't him. Just a stranger hurrying home. I sank back into the chair, tears mixing with the reflection of raindrops. It wasn't about seeing him anymore. It was about missing him in a way that no photograph, no memory could fill. That night, I couldn't sleep. I went to the kitchen, made myself a cup of tea, and sat at the table, the same table where Daniel used to study late at night. His chair was still there, a little worn, still creaking when you leaned back. I reached across the table and whispered, "I forgive you, my boy." The words came out before I even thought about them, and suddenly, the tears came, not the quiet kind, but the ones that have waited too long. It wasn't anger. It was love, unreturned but still alive. A few weeks later, I decided to do something I hadn't done in years: write him a letter. Not a text, not an email. A real letter, in my handwriting. I sat at my old wooden desk, took out a sheet of paper, and began. "Dear Daniel. I hope you're happy. That's all a mother ever wants, really, to know her child is okay. The house is quiet these days, but don't worry about me. I've learned to keep myself busy. I found your old shirt while cleaning. I washed it and folded it neatly. It reminded me of the time we went to the lake, and you dropped your sandwich in the water. You laughed so hard you made me laugh too. Do you remember that, sweetheart? I hope you do. Anyway, no need to reply if you're busy. Just know that I love you, more than time, more than distance. Mom." I sealed the letter and placed it on the table. But I never mailed it. It didn't feel right, like sending a message into an empty space. So I kept it in a small wooden box with the others. Around that time, I started helping at the local community center, teaching a small group of children how to read. They were loud, cheerful, full of life. And for the first time in a while, I felt needed again. One little boy, about 6 years old, would always run up and hug me at the end of class. He reminded me of Daniel, that same spark in his eyes, that same way of holding on too tight. One day, he asked, "Do you have any kids, miss?" I paused for a moment, then smiled softly. "Yes. I do." He nodded, satisfied, and ran off to play. That tiny conversation stayed with me the whole night. It reminded me that love doesn't end when someone leaves. It just changes shape. But the real turning point came unexpectedly. One late afternoon, I was in the kitchen when I heard the sound of the postman's bike outside. When I opened the door, there was a small brown envelope, no return address, just my name written in familiar handwriting. My heart raced. It was Daniel's. I sat down before opening it, my hands trembling. Inside was a short note. "Hey, Mom. I found this old photo of us at the beach. Emily said I should send it to you. Thought you'd like it. We've been busy settling in. Sorry, I haven't called much. I'll try soon. Love, Daniel." And there it was. A photo of me holding Daniel, maybe 6 years old, laughing as the waves hit our feet. I ran my fingers over the image, tracing his little face. For the first time in a long while, I smiled. He still remembered. Even if only for a moment, he still thought of me. That night, I placed the photo on the nightstand beside my bed. The house felt lighter somehow. Not because everything was fixed, but because I'd finally stopped waiting for what might never come. Instead, I started living again, not for the calls, not for the visits, but for myself. A few weeks later, I did something brave. I took the train to their city. I didn't tell them I was coming, not out of anger this time, but out of peace. I just wanted to see where he lived, to know he was okay. When I reached their neighborhood, I stayed across the street, near a small cafe. I ordered a cup of coffee and sat by the window. From there, I could see their apartment building, tall, neat, full of windows that looked the same. And then, through one of them, I saw him. Daniel. He was laughing, sitting by the table, Emily across from him. They looked happy. Something inside me finally softened. The ache that had lived in my chest for so long began to loosen its hold. He was okay. He was living his life. And that was enough. As I walked back to the train station, I passed a small bookstore. In the window, a sign read, "Letters Never Sent, Stories of Love and Letting Go." I went inside and bought it. It felt like the universe was speaking to me in quiet, gentle whispers. That night, as the train moved through the dark countryside, I thought about all the moments I had waited, all the words I never said, all the love that had nowhere to go. And I realized, love doesn't disappear. It just finds quieter places to live. In memories. In photographs. In the hope that maybe, someday, he'll remember the way I always did. When I got home, I took Daniel's old shirt, folded it neatly, and placed it beside the photo he'd sent. Then I whispered softly. "You'll always have a home here, my son. Even if you never come back." And for the first time, those words didn't hurt. They felt true. They felt free. The turning point wasn't about Daniel coming back. It was about me learning that sometimes, love's greatest act is letting go, with grace, not bitterness. I had spent so long waiting for him to return, when maybe what he needed most was to know that he could leave and still be loved. That night, I stepped out onto the porch. The air was cool. The stars were bright. Somewhere in the distance, a car drove by, headlights glowing for just a second before fading into the dark. And I smiled. Because whether or not he ever looks back, I'll always be here, quietly, lovingly, wishing him well. The weeks after that train journey were gentler. Something inside me had shifted, not dramatically, but softly, like snow melting after a long winter. I didn't cry as much anymore. I still missed Daniel, of course. But the pain had changed shape. It no longer felt sharp, more like a quiet echo that reminded me of love that once filled this house. Sometimes I'd sit in the garden, pruning the little rose bush Daniel and I planted years ago. The flowers had always bloomed late, stubbornly waiting for warmth. I think I understood them now. Life became slower, and in its slowness, I found peace. I joined a local knitting circle. At first, I thought it would just be something to pass the time, but it turned out to be more than that. There was comfort in small conversations, women sharing stories, laughter, memories, losses. Everyone carried something unseen, just like me. We didn't fix each other's pain, but somehow, sitting together in that shared silence, we made it lighter. One afternoon, I was sitting at my usual spot in the community center when an older lady named Ruth said something that stayed with me. She looked up from her knitting and said, "You know, love doesn't stop when people forget to return it. It just changes jobs." I smiled. Changes jobs. Yes, she said. Sometimes, it stops being a gift and becomes a quiet prayer instead. I didn't respond, but that night, I understood. I wasn't waiting for Daniel's love anymore. I was simply loving him, in a quiet, prayerful way that didn't demand anything back. The days rolled on. Seasons changed. Every morning, I'd open the windows wide, letting the breeze carry in the scent of dew and earth. I'd hum softly while making tea, sometimes catching myself smiling for no reason. The house still echoed with silence, but it was no longer an enemy. It had become part of the rhythm, gentle, familiar, peaceful. One day in early autumn, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't pick it up, but something in my chest told me to, "Hello?" There was a pause, and then a voice I hadn't heard in years. "Mom?" It was Daniel. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I just sat there, the phone pressed to my ear, heart thudding softly. "Hi, sweetheart," I said finally, my voice trembling just a little. He exhaled. "It's been a while." "Yes," I whispered. "It has." We talked for a few minutes, polite, cautious, almost like strangers who once knew each other very well. He asked how I was. I told him I was fine. I asked about Emily, and he said she was doing good. There were small silences between sentences, but this time, they didn't feel heavy. They felt healing. Before hanging up, he said, "I was going through some boxes and found more old photos. Thought maybe we could visit sometime." My heart skipped a beat. "I'd like that," I said softly. "Okay," he replied. "I'll call you soon." And then the line went silent. I stared at the phone for a long while after, no tears this time, just a deep, quiet warmth spreading through me. The next few weeks were filled with small, beautiful moments. He began calling every Sunday evening. Sometimes for 10 minutes, sometimes for an hour. We'd talk about simple things, recipes, the garden, his new job. Once, he laughed and said, "Emily burned the lasagna again. You'd have." Teased her for weeks. I laughed too. "She'll learn. We all do." The laughter felt fragile at first, like glass, but with each call, it grew stronger, steadier. One day, I received a photo on my phone. It was Daniel and Emily standing in front of their house, smiling, holding a little baby girl. Underneath it, he'd written, "Mom, meet Lily." For a moment, I just stared at it, hand over my heart. That tiny face, those eyes, they had a spark of Daniel in them. I whispered to myself, "Welcome to the world, Lily." Months passed, and Daniel called again, this time with an invitation. "Mom, would you like to visit us? Maybe stay for a weekend?" For a moment, I didn't know what to say. My first instinct was fear, fear of being too much, fear of the silence returning. But then I thought of how far we'd both come. "Yes," I said. I'd love that the train ride to his city felt different this time. I wasn't holding on to pain anymore. Just a small suitcase, a knitted blanket, and an open heart. When I arrived, Daniel was waiting at the station. Older now, with faint lines near his eyes. But when he smiled, it was the same boy I had raised, just a little more grown, a little more human. "Mom," he said, and before I could respond, he hugged me. A real hug, long, warm, wordless. I felt his heartbeat against mine. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like someone who had been left behind. I felt like someone who had been found again. At his home, Emily greeted me with open arms. She had baked cookies. They were a bit burnt, just like Daniel said. We all laughed about it. And then I saw her, little Lily, in her crib, sleeping peacefully. Her tiny hands curled into fists, her chest rising and falling with each soft breath. I stood there, unable to speak. Emily whispered, "Would you like to hold her?" I nodded. When I lifted her into my arms, the world seemed to pause. She was so small, so perfect, warm against my chest. I could feel the years of distance melt away, not erased, not forgotten, just softened. Daniel stood beside me, watching quietly. He said, "She likes you already." And I smiled. "I think she knows who I am." That evening, we sat together at the dinner table, the three of us, and little Lily asleep nearby. The air was filled with laughter, stories, the clinking of dishes. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed the sound of family. After dinner, Daniel and I stepped outside. The night was cool, stars faint above the city lights. He said, "Mom, I'm sorry." I turned to him, gently. For what? Or for not calling? For not visiting? For leaving the way I did? I looked at him, really looked at him, this grown man, once my little boy. And I shook my head. "No, Daniel. Don't be sorry. Life has its ways. We all learn when we're ready." He looked down, eyes glistening. "I thought you'd hate me," I smiled, reaching out to touch his hand. "There was never a day I stopped loving you." He let out a quiet breath, part relief, part sorrow. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "Thank you, Mom." The rest of the weekend passed in moments too tender to describe. Feeding Lily her bottle. Helping Emily in the kitchen. Listening to Daniel talk about work. Ordinary things. But after years of emptiness, they felt extraordinary. When it was time to leave, Daniel drove me to the station. As the train pulled in, he hugged me again, tighter this time. He said, "We'll visit next month, okay?" I nodded, smiling through tears. "I'll make tea." He laughed. Just like old times, as the train pulled away, I looked out the window and saw him standing there, waving. This time, when he drove away, he looked back. Twice. And in that moment, everything that had once felt broken began to heal. When I got home, I placed Lily's photo on the mantel beside Daniel's childhood picture. Then I made myself a cup of tea, sat near the window, and let the golden afternoon light fill the room. I realized that forgiveness isn't about forgetting the pain. It's about remembering with love instead of bitterness. And peace doesn't arrive all at once. It comes quietly, in small moments that whisper, "You made it through." That night, I went to bed with a full heart. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel empty. It felt alive, not with noise, but with love that had finally found its way home. The days after he left were quiet, too quiet. The kettle still whistled in the mornings, but no one sat across the table anymore. The sun still poured through the kitchen window, but it fell on an empty chair. I'd find myself setting 2 cups of tea out of habit, then quietly putting one back. For a long time, I replayed that day in my head, the sound of his car fading down the street, the way he didn't look back. I kept wondering what I could have said differently, what I could have done to make him stay just a little longer. But life doesn't give you rewinds, only pauses to reflect. Eventually, I began to write him letters. Not to send, just to say the things I never had the courage to say aloud. I told him about the garden, how the roses finally bloomed again, how the cat still waits by the gate every evening. I wrote about how proud I was, and how sorry I felt for the words said in anger and the silence that followed. One morning, I decided to visit his old room. It was just as he left it. The faint smell of his cologne still lingered in the air, and on the shelf sat a photo of us, taken years ago, at the beach. I picked it up and smiled through tears. We looked so happy, so unaware of how fast time would pull us apart. It took me years to understand that love doesn't disappear when people leave, it just changes form. It hides in memories, in old photographs, in the scent of morning coffee that reminds you of someone you miss. I realized my love for my son didn't end when he drove away. It stayed here, quiet and patient, waiting for him whenever he decides to come home. A few months ago, a letter came. It was short, just a few lines. He said he was sorry for being distant, that life had been heavy, and that he missed me. I held that letter like it was made of glass, afraid it would vanish if I breathed too hard. That night, I sat by the window, watching the street where he once drove away. The wind felt softer somehow. I whispered, "It's okay, my son. You don't have to look back anymore. I'll always be here." And in that moment, I realized, sometimes love isn't about holding on. It's about letting go with grace, and keeping your heart open for when they find their way back. Because no matter how far they go, a mother's love stays right where it began, at home.